Hello and welcome to the Tune Up. I am your host, Sarah Z. This week, we are going to talk about anxiety and our children and what we can do as parents to help empower them in their relationship with their anxiety so that they can be successful in their relationships, in school, and beyond. I woke up to a very depressing notification from the New York Times. I subscribe to, I have mental health notifications. So anytime a new article comes out about anxiety or depression in children, I get a little notification. And I was frankly terrified by this headline, which is "It's Life or Death, the Mental Health Crisis Among U.S. Teens." And this is something that I worry about. My kids are preteens right now, and they do struggle with anxiety and panic attacks. There is depression on both sides of their family. And so I am constantly on the lookout for signs of that. And I know that for the last 2 years, our children, in addition to ourselves, have been under a tremendous amount of strain and stress. And I don't think any of us were really ready or equipped to deal with the trauma that we all underwent as a world, as humans. And I'm talking to you about it today because this is something that we have got to get a handle on because we are losing our kids. And whether you're a parent or not, mental health is important. And I can't tell you how many days or weeks I get comments or messages from folks that say, I'm so anxious, I can't go to work. I don't have a handle on my anxiety. I can't leave the house. And I want more for my kids, frankly, and I want more for myself. And as someone who is able to function, I'm a highly functioning person out in the world who still lives with anxiety. I want to share the tools and tricks and hacks, whatever you want to call them, that I use to be able to live with anxiety and panic on a daily basis, but still be able to function, because our kids need that. They need access to those tools. They need adults talking about it and normalizing it so they don't feel alone, and that they realize that there are solutions to some of the things that they're experiencing. And so just to start off this episode, I had a great question this week from a parent who basically was asking about my children, who both of my kids deal with anxiety pretty regularly. And they asked me how my kids were doing in school and if I recommended smaller class sizes and more one-on-one teacher time for my kids. And I'm going to preface this whole episode and this whole podcast series by saying I am not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I am someone who lives with anxiety and is able to function fairly successfully out in the world. I have worked with a therapist. I have been medicated at certain points, but I also have a lot of tools that I use, holistic tools that I use to help basically, I don't want to say manage my anxiety, but live with it in a way that I can still function optimally. And so I'm coming from a parent who has road tested certain things with myself and certain things with my kids, and I'm sharing that. That is where I am coming from. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. So that's out of the way. So yes, I do have some thoughts on this. My kids basically are functioning well in school, and my answer is going to be a little annoying because it's going to be one of those "it depends" kind of answers. It really is. Every choice we make for our children is unique to our child because our child's needs are going to be different than other children's, right? So what triggers my children's anxiety is more health related. So COVID was very triggering for them. Social distancing, and then the end of social distancing, going back to school, those kind of things trigger their anxious buttons versus being around a lot of kids. Now, myself, I'm better in smaller groups. So I would have thrived in a smaller school setting. So you really have to assess what's going on with your child and then make the decision that you think is going to be the best situation for them to thrive. Now, that being said, I would caution any parent to make a knee-jerk reaction and pull their kids out of school. Because here is what I have learned having lived with anxiety for over a decade. And that is, the world is not really going to change, right? There's always going to be these circumstances that are anxiety producing. And while I understand the need and the desire to protect our children and to give them the most nurturing environment for them to grow and thrive, and we want that, but also we do need to allow them to grow beyond limitations. And so if we are constantly softening the world for them and expecting the world to treat them as we treat them, we're setting them up to fail. Because the first time they have to give a presentation for a group over 20 people at work, they're going to have a hard time because they didn't grow up in a school system where they're used to speaking in front of a larger class. Now, if your child is struggling with depression or they're being bullied at school and that situation isn't right for them, absolutely pull them out, put them in a smaller classroom. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is making a decision out of a knee-jerk want to put your child in a protective bubble at all costs kind of reaction, which I have had. I've been there. I've faced my child being afraid and having a panic attack, and my first thought was like, nope, I'm going to homeschool, right? And sometimes that is the answer. Sometimes homeschool is the right answer, but that's where I can't answer that for you. It turned out that wasn't the right answer for my child at that time, because the socialization piece was something that both of them really needed. And I am not able to provide the kind of homeschool curriculum or education or environment that would really have allowed my children to thrive. So, yes, unfortunately, you are going to have to kind of assess for yourself. I would just say go gently with those kind of big life-changing decisions. Pulling them out of school or changing their schools are a transition for our kids, and they can be kind of traumatic. And if our kids struggle with anxiety or panic, like, there are different tools that you're going to want to, and supports that you're going to want to have in place to kind of ease those transitions. But, make sure that you are making the choice out of this is what's best for them, out of a reactive, fear-based, knee-jerk reaction. Okay. And the truth is, there are people operating in the world in high-level, successful careers and living with and managing, managing anxiety. It is possible to have a high-functioning, highly successful, high-stakes career and life with big relationships and big families and a lot of pressures, and still be anxious. Those things are not like mutually exclusive. It's not like, oh, they have anxiety, they're never going to be able to, do much because they're hindered by it, right? Like, we don't want them to be hindered. We want them to be like, oh, I have this, I need to kind of take care of it so I can still perform optimally. A lot of celebrities, and this is what I love about this mental health kind of revolution that we're going through right now as a nation is people are starting to talk about it, and we're starting to destigmatize these issues. Oprah Winfrey, Taylor Swift, Stephen Colbert, Adele, Missy Elliott, Whoopi Goldberg, Kristen Bell. They are just, a small, kind of snapshot list of folks that have been very vocal about their struggles with anxiety. And I think, most of those names are names you're going to recognize, and you're going to recognize they have big lives, big careers. And in terms of ticking the boxes of success, they're able to do that in spite of or in addition to having anxiety. So how do we give our children access to that? It's not like they were born with a superpower that our children don't have. They may have some resilience pieces that our children haven't found yet, but as parents, we want to help them get to that place so that they can have big dreams and big hopes and be able to go after them despite being afraid or having anxiety or having panic or depression or whatever. Okay. So I'm going to start with some of the things that, when I first started out, just kind of a list of what you don't do, right? So when my kids first started really exhibiting some anxiety attacks or panic attacks, my knee-jerk reaction was like, well, why do you feel that way? Or stop worrying, which never works, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever gone to a friend and you're really pissed off and they're like, stop being so angry or stop being so sad. What are you so sad about? And it totally negates your experience because you do feel this way. And so we want to, as much as we want the feelings to go away, or maybe we can't even relate to why they're feeling the way they do, we want to allow them to have this space to express what's going on for them and what's true for them. And, part of the way we create that space is by modeling it in our own lives, so that when we do have an emotional struggle of some sort, we share it with our kids. I am pretty open with my kids. Like, mom's having some anxiety about this, or I had a panic attack today, and this is what I did to help myself in those moments, and start to normalize that these are normal emotions normal feelings that you're going to have. And this is how you take care of them. And the more you model that, the more you give space to your kids to come to you and say, hey, you know what? I was feeling panic today, or I was feeling anxious, or I was feeling worried today. And it gives them that space. And it also gives them the vocabulary, right? So the thing you have to remember is they're children. They don't necessarily have the words yet to what it is they're experiencing. I know, especially with my youngest, who's younger and, has less ability to label what's going on with him verbally, it comes out as an outburst. Like, it's anger usually first, and underneath that is the fear, right? So the more you model it, the more you're giving them the vocabulary, and the more you're giving them space to express themselves and to, realize like, hey, this is something that I'm going to have to take care of. Because here is the unfortunate truth. Anxiety and panic aren't going away. And I'm going to say that one more time. Anxiety and panic aren't going away. It is a normal function of our brains to alert us to possible dangers out in the world. And the way I look at it as someone who has anxiety and has children with it, it's not so much I look at it as a hindrance anymore. It's more that my anxiety center of my brain is a little too high functioning. It's a little too sensitive. I think in the last episode when we were talking about thriving in spite of anxiety, I said that it was kind of like a car alarm, like those early car alarms before the technology got better, where even just like if you walked a little too close to the car, it would start going off like whoop, whoop, whoop. or like it's a little too windy and all of a sudden your car alarm's going off. That's basically what my brain is doing. My anxiety center is just a little too sensitive, and it kind of, it's like a little wonky. It's kind of setting it off too often in circumstances that aren't really situations where I should be afraid. Okay. And it's important that your kids know that that discomfort probably not going to go away. It is a normal, needed function in the world, because if we weren't afraid sometimes, we would just cross our street in front of traffic and just assume, oh, they're going to stop, right? There's no need to be worried about that. Like, there's no need to, let's throw caution to the wind. Like, it'll all work out. No, like your brain, like there's a reason we have this. And unfortunately, for some of us, it's just a little too finely tuned. Okay. And, I did talk about this last week when I was talking about what happens to our brains with chronic anxiety is once we start worrying, our brain gets used to that and it starts to become like its default setting. So it's like, I think I called it the wonky bat signal. It's like, oh, it's going off just whenever. And unfortunately, we have to just kind of call ourselves on it. Like, is this really something that I should be afraid about or what? Like, what's going on here? But again, we're talking about our kids here. So it's important that we model and normalize when we're going through things like that and how we deal with them to help them gain the vocabulary and the tools that we use to kind of help ourselves in those moments. And also, so they understand that that discomfort is a normal biological function that their brain is doing to kind of protect themselves, right? I know for myself, the first time I had a panic attack, I didn't know what the fuck was going on. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm dying. And no, I wasn't dying. My brain was telling me I was going to die, but I was worried about, I was triggered. It was actually a financial trigger. And I, in my mind, the world was ending, right? And so we need to just, as much as we can, arm our kids with the knowledge of what is happening, what triggers. So helping them identify the triggers, what's going on with the brain, letting them know that, hey, fear, it is a normal function of the brain. Sometimes we have a little too highly tuned fear sensor. And this is what I do when my fear sensor is going off and there's really nothing that I need to actually be fearful of or make a huge change over, right? Because sometimes when we're afraid, it's something you do need. Like, I was hiking in the woods and I saw a coyote and yep, my fear sensor went off right away. And in that instance, I needed to do something to protect myself, my dog, and get the heck out of there without being eaten by a coyote who thought I was its McDonald's lunch, right? But letting them know that sometimes, we got to kind of assess, like, okay, what's going on here? Is this a real fear that I need to handle, or is this a fear that I need to take care of in a different way, right? And so once you've given them space, then that's when you invite them to be kind of curious about it. Like, okay, what are we afraid of here? So I'm going to share an example that happened just yesterday. My son, who, my youngest, was waiting for his father to come home, my husband, and his dad was like, oh, I'll be home in like 10 minutes. Well, 10 minutes passed and he wasn't home yet because it's LA, there's traffic, blah, blah, blah. Well, my son was panicked. He's like, why isn't he home yet? And then he called and my husband's ringer wasn't on, so he didn't pick up right away. And rather than tell my son to stop worrying, I got curious and I asked him, I said, what do you think is happening right now? And he said, well, I think Daddy's lost. And I asked him then, well, if dad has been to the temple several times and back, has he ever, been lost before? And so through just kind of asking, like just being curious about where the fear was coming from and what the fear is and what is the fear around it. and starting to help him kind of unravel the tangle of his thoughts. Now, my son was still having an anxiety attack or a panic attack. He was pacing, he was, starting to get a little frantic. And ultimately, what we did was we set a time limit. Like, okay, so maybe dad, I'm not going to say, well, dad's not lost, because I don't know what's going on with my husband, right? Like, he's not there. He's not picking up his phone. So I don't want to lie and say that I know something, that I have access to information that my son doesn't have. But what I did was I set okay, we're going to wait 5 more minutes. And if dad isn't home, we'll get in the car and we'll go look for him. If you think that he's lost, right? And within 5 minutes, my husband was home. So it's more that when you're having a panic attack, like, for example, using my son's example, in his mind, his dad was lost, in a neighborhood that is 2 minutes away, less than a mile. He's traveled it, 200 miles. But when you're panicked, your brain isn't being rational anymore. And so with curiosity, you can, with questions, and with your kids, you're going to have to do the questioning yourself. They're not going to be able to do that themselves. You're going to have to do it for them. And you're going to have to do it in a non-judgmental way, just to help them kind of unravel the fear that is underlying. And his fear was his dad was lost. And it didn't matter that that's not rational. It doesn't make sense. But that was his fear, right? And so then once you've uncovered the fear and you've labeled it like, oh, you're afraid that daddy's going to be lost, then it's our job to help get them back in the room and figure out a game plan. Okay, so our fear is that dad is lost. How are we going to take care of that feeling so that you feel better in these next few moments? And so my son, we chose the 5-minute warning. We were going to wait 5 minutes. And in that 5 minutes, he agreed he was going to do his 4-8 breathing, which the kids inhale for a count of 4. They exhale for a count of 8. It helps calm their nervous system within just a few breaths. It's really miraculous. I love it. I do it all the time myself, and it's very, very effective. But by doing that, and by having an agreement with him of a plan of action, he felt empowered about what we were going to do, but then he also was back in the room practicing his techniques to calm his body down. So that's kind of how I handle it in the moment. And sometimes, I make mistakes. Sometimes I'm not quite clued in to what's going on, or it takes a while to kind of uncover what the fear is, because my son is just freaking out and just kind of like, he doesn't want to talk. He wants to cry or yell or just, he's just so afraid. And so this doesn't work for every time, but it's something that I think works a lot. And it's something that definitely is worth you trying next time. So basically, you give them the space to have their reaction, whatever that reaction is, even if it's not rational, right? Because panic and anxiety, it's usually not rational anymore. Like, we're not out and about worried that bears are going to eat us. And we never lived in dinosaur time, but you know what I mean? Like, our physical selves are usually pretty safe, right? So what we need to do is allow them to have the space to have their reaction, and then start to uncover what is triggering the fear. And in this case, my son was afraid of for my husband. Whether that fear was based in reality or not, it's not for me to judge. That was his fear, and I needed to meet that with curiosity versus judgment, or, oh, don't feel that way. That's ridiculous. Nothing's going to happen to him, right? And so by allowing him to have that fear and label it for what it was, then I could work with him on getting him back in the room and how are we going to take care of this? How are we going to take care of it so that you can feel better? And it works. And it works for me. I walk myself through it, as an adult, I just kind of talk myself through it. I give myself a little talk. But with my kids, I do a lot of directed questioning. Anyway, I know that is a lot I have thrown at you, but I hope that it gives you just some ideas on how you can start allowing your kids to explore having a relationship with their anxiety versus making it go away. Because the truth is, it's never going to go away completely. That being said, you may find that the more that you empower them and the more they catch their triggers early and they caretake themselves, you may find that they're triggered less, and they're triggered less by things that aren't necessarily not, non-triggering events. Like, for example, there are times, I just shared there are times when anxiety is perfectly normal, like speaking in front of a large group of people. I don't care who you are. If you're going to speak in front of 1,000 people, that's going to be pretty anxiety producing versus talking in front of like a group of 5 people. And so it's never going to completely go away, but you may find that the more that you empower them, the more you empower yourselves, they'll be triggered less, or they'll be triggered in circumstances where you're like, oh, that makes sense, versus, oh, where is this coming from? This is, I don't get it. This is unusual or atypical. But yeah, I think that for me, as someone who doesn't want anxiety to stop me, I think really the secret is not that my anxiety goes away. My secret is that I'm able to be uncomfortable, and I'm able to take care of myself when I'm uncomfortable and still function in spite of that, in spite of feeling uncomfortable. And that really is the trick. It's like being anxious or having a panic attack, like your brain is telling you that you're dying, or things are, the world is ending, and there is physical discomfort, there's mental anguish associated with that. I have learned how to caretake that discomfort and function in spite of that. And I find that in my journey through this, I do get triggered less. I still have my moments, but I also have found that I actually think it's kind of what gives me my inner strength is learning how to deal with those kind of extreme emotional disturbances and learning how to caretake myself. It's made me a very strong human being. And so in some ways, I'm thankful for the experience. And it sounds weird to say, but in some ways I am thankful, because also too, it has helped me in helping shepherd my kids through their own experiences with anxiety or panic. But I hope this helps a little. I will be sharing more tips and tools about dealing with anxiety, as someone who has it, and also as a parent of a child who has anxiety or panic. Let's normalize this stuff. Let's make mental health, something that everyone can have access to, and have access to the tools they need to feel mentally healthy. All right, I will talk to y'all next week. Bye.